Welcome back to the Just Jake podcast. I'm Jake Terrace, and today we have a very special guest. I'm pumped to talk to Christopher August, ChristopherAugust.co. He's a transformation teacher and guide, co-founder of an awesome breathwork app that we're going to get into, and I can't wait to tell the audience about and share with you guys. Welcome, Christopher. How you doing today, man?
Good, brother. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I'd kind of mentioned the beats and breath, and we'll definitely get into that. But why don't we just get a little background on you, where you joining us from, and then maybe kind of talk about where in this world you grow up and what that was like, and kind of we'll get into. I know a little bit of your story, and I definitely want to get into some bits and pieces of it with the audience to let them know kind of how your journey began, and some very interesting stories about you and the Peace Corps and a near-death experience. But before we get into that, why don't you just give us a little background about yourself and what you're all about?
Yeah, no doubt, man. So I'm actually tuning in from San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. This is where I would live full time. Travel a lot, but live here, grounded here. Been here for about 3 years now, and really loving being in the mountains of Mexico. It's just really beautiful and grounding place for me. But I actually grew up in Buffalo, New York, where I lived for most of my life until my mid 20s, and that's when I ended up moving to Africa and going through that experience, which I'm sure we'll get into later. But yeah, growing up in Buffalo, it's they call it the city of good neighbors. It has a bad rap because of all the snow and some of the pretty harsh winters. But other than that, man, it was an amazing place to grow up, and super thankful for my upbringing, even though amongst all the struggles and challenges that we all have, it was a great opportunity to be there. And, since then have been really traveling the world and seeing all of these beautiful places that exist on this planet. So very, very excited to be here in Mexico. And my journey has led me all over, and to bring me here has been a great gift.
Yeah, and let's kind of get into that. You talk about being in Buffalo, and what you do today in terms of transformation teacher and guide is far different than what you probably planned on doing, going through, school, high school, into secondary school, college, whatnot. And then you were part of the corporate world to begin with. And then, as I mentioned, you went to the Peace Corps. Talk about that transition. I know you had I guess a regular, 9 to 5 job in the corporate world, and then you had a calling to the Peace Corps, which why don't you share that experience with the audience?
Yeah, for sure, man. So I was working in the corporate world. I was sort of following the status quo like we all do, really not knowing what we want out of life, having some vague idea, but perhaps a lot of times those ideas being inspired or influenced by those around us, right? And, our parents have an idea of what they want from us. Society has an idea for what they want from us. But truly, when you tune into yourself, like, what is it do you want for yourself? And I was asking myself that question for a while, but just kind of going through the motions like a lot of us do. And, me going through the motions looked like going to college, getting then a master's degree, fulfilling that master's degree, and graduating at the top of my class in business leadership. And then while working in the corporate world, being called upon by the higher ups, by the vice president and president of the company, to climb the corporate ladder. And, at in your mid 20s, when that's happening, you feel pretty special and good, because it's like, wow, like, I've got all these achievements. It looks great on paper. I have money in the bank. I have a new car. I have a great apartment. I'm partying. I'm having fun. But, at the end of the day, when I was really sitting with this lifestyle, sure, there's one part of me that was fulfilled and satisfied and having fun, but the other part of me felt very empty. And I knew that I was reaching this, crossroads, this turning point in my life. And, I was asking for signs. I was asking for guidance from my guides, my higher self, whatever you want to call it, God, universe, just saying, "Hey, point me in the right direction to where I need to be because right now what I'm doing is not really fulfilling my spirit. It's not fulfilling my core values of helping others, of spirituality, of creativity, of all of the things that I truly value deep down within myself." And so one day I was driving home on the highway and I saw a sign on the road and it said, "Are you ready to answer the call?" And in the bottom right-hand corner it said sponsored by the Peace Corps. And at that time I didn't know what the Peace Corps was. So I went home. This is back in 2011, 2012, and I started to look up Peace Corps and I found out that it's this American governmental organization that has people sent all over the world in 80 different countries and living and working in these remote conditions as health and business volunteers, agriculture volunteers, teachers, and so forth. And I was very intrigued because there was a part of me that really wanted to fully remove myself from where I was, which was in Buffalo in this corporate environment. And so, long story short, I after doing research, I started to apply, filling out all the paperwork, and then I get moved on to the next step, getting through all the medical tests, the psychological test, all of that. Very rigorous process to go through that took pretty much a year to go through. And then a little over a year later, I was notified by email saying you've been accepted to the Peace Corps Tanzania as a health and business volunteer, and you have 7 days to decide. So, right then and there was that turning point, and I felt this drop in my stomach, like, "Whoa, this is for real!" Like moving, living, working in Africa, which is a place that I couldn't possibly have conceived of ever living or even potentially even going to. But here I was presented with this opportunity and I knew I had to take it. So I'll pause there, but that was sort of the premise that got me to that situation, to joining the Peace Corps.
I mean, man, what I have so many questions in terms of like what was that calling like to because I know in my life I've been uncomfortable or at dis-ease and really probably ignored a lot of those signs. And I know probably a lot of people do. They don't listen to that inner self, that inner being, the understanding of something almost to be like this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. But I know from my experience, it'd be like I may have had that thought and then be like, well, I couldn't possibly step out of this. For you to take that leap, like the amount of courage that takes, was it a matter of the discomfort of where you were at was so great that you just had to make a switch, or was it like uh, the intrigue of the Peace Corps? What was that like? Like go into that thinking a little bit, put yourself back into that space, and because I'm fascinated with that because the courage that it takes to over because I don't believe, look, that anybody walks through life fearless, right? I think that's not reality. We look at a lot of people who have a lot of courage, and that I grew up in the '90s, and that was a big no fear campaign, and all this no fear, and I've come to understanding, and what I believe in is that people who look like they're fearless, it's really about cultivating courage because I think courage is the antithesis of fear. And you just have to have 1% more courage than you do fear. And so, where
Mm.
you were in your life at that young age, how did you cultivate that courage? Because there's a lot of things that push us into it. For me, the biggest persuader in my life has been looking at death. In terms of I've had different levels of, okay, if I don't make a change, I'm going to die. Whether it be I was 374 pounds, I'm a full recovered alcoholic. I was looking at these things that like because that's just kind of my personality. I go to the extreme, and it's still like that in some instances. But today, I don't have to get to that level of discomfort before I can recognize and make that change. But at that young of an age, to have that spiritual awareness or whatever that being in tune to the universe and listening to that calling, you know, look, I don't believe in anything such as a coincidence. So everything that happens to me in my life, that's just the way that the universe has designed it. It took me a long way to get there. I used to blame a lot of stuff. I used to always point the finger. I used to come up with a lot of excuses in life, a woe is me mentality for a long or most of my early 20s, and if something bad happened to me, it was, I had a really hard time at looking at myself in the mirror and saying, there's only one person's fault and it's mine. And that's how, I have what I call extreme ownership. I stole it from a guy named Jocko Willink, but it's like, no matter what happens to me, I own at least, even if it's 0.1, 1%, I own just for being in that space, whether it's someone running a red light and hitting me, that I was in that place to get hit. So what what was I doing in my, karmic predicament to have that happen? But yeah, talk about that space that you're in, and what that decision was like.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting because, just to shoot straight, like there definitely was fear, no doubt about it. And there was a level of discomfort, both with my situation I was in, but also with the idea of going to this faraway land where I didn't know anybody. And so, but, at the end of the day, and really tapping into the essence that was alive within me. And really, if I were to boil it down, it was this sort of curiosity because I was living a good life. Like I was having fun, I was DJing on the weekends, I was partying, I was having a good time. I was dating amazing women, beautiful women. So there was no sort of qualm about this, especially a man in your mid 20s. But there was a deeper level of curiosity and wonder that if I didn't do that, then where would my life be? If I didn't take the opportunity. And I always said to myself at that time, I remember I said, if it doesn't work out, I can always come back to what I'm doing. That's always going to be there. I have the piece of paper, I have the master's degree, I have the skill set, I have everything I need to be a leader in the corporate space. That will be there.
Hmm.
But I don't want to live with regret knowing that one day I'm on my deathbed and I said, you know what? I didn't take that because I was too scared, because I lived too much in fear. That would ultimately kill me. So for me, every decision that I make, including that decision a decade ago, always is made from the perspective that if I don't do this, will I regret this later? And if the answer is yes, then I have to do it. I have to go for it. I have to go into it. And for me, that is super important to just go as deep as I can into that experience and allow it to be what it will be. And for fortunately enough, that was a catalyst, not only that decision, but the experience in itself.
Yeah, so let's go into that decision. You go from Buffalo, New York to Tanzania, Africa. Tanzania, correct?
Yeah, Tanzania.
So let's talk about it, man. Like, what's that like? Because we live in the United States of America, and I'm so blessed to live in this country and be born in this country. But we don't. This is not reality. Like, this is not the rest of the world. We look at somebody who makes. If you make $34,000 a year, you look at like you're lower class. You're poor, right? But what that does, if you're making $34,000, that you're in the 1% of the world. Like, that's the reality. You're a 1%. We talk about the 1%. You're in that 1% if you make $34,000 or more. So you obviously grew up in Buffalo and now you're going to Africa. What's that like? Like, what is that transition? Because you're, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away from a safe space that you grew up, you always knew, and now you go from bitter cold. Because I've spent some time in Buffalo just through work. I mean, I've been up there probably 10 or 12 times, and I've been in there, lake effects and all, man. So going from that cold just to a whole different continent, what was that like for a young man in his 20s?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite a drastic change as you can imagine, being there and traveling about 8,000 miles away, right? So I remember the first time because you're joining when you join, you get put together in a cohort. So with me, there was 35 other Americans from all over the country that met. We got briefed in Philadelphia, met for a couple of days, and then we all flew together overseas to Tanzania. And each of us had different roles and responsibilities, that we would have in that experience than what we were going there for. And during that time, we can all bond over that one thing, that we're taking this adventure into the unknown, this journey into the unknown. Nobody really knows what to expect. But getting there, going over there, definitely was a massive eye-opening experience where there was a lot of adjustment, as you could potentially imagine from being there. So in the first, just to kind of set the stage so people can kind of grasp how this all plays out. So for the first 2 to 3 months, you're put into a host family's house. You live all together with your cohort in a small village. Everybody has their own host family. During the day, you go to trainings, learning the language. In this case, it was Swahili. Um, and then you also get briefed security briefings and all that. So you really have to be deeply immersed into the culture. This is a very, very important protocol, because you can't possibly live on your own in the country without having sort of this low level background. And so every day you'd go to class, you'd meet up with your cohort, and then you come back to your host family. And for me, I lived with 7 other people in this house. It was a mom and a dad, and then their kids. Very small house. 4 or 5 of them slept in one room together. I had my own room in the back where all the chickens were and stuff, and I had a tiny little bed, very uncomfortable place. And but I would be back there, and just to kind of set that up a little bit. You imagine the single bed, not much in the room at all. And then you go around, and there's this bathroom. It's not really a bathroom, it's just a hole in the ground. And when you shower, you're taking bucket baths,
Hmm.
right? With your heat up with some water and pour some water over your head, scrub your body, rinse yourself. So it's very primal way of living. So this was my first introduction. And of course, they don't speak any English, they speak Swahili, and I'm just learning the language. So it was such an experience. Just those couple months, I was like, holy shit, what did I get myself involved in? And then, of course, from there, you're put into and assigned a village where you would then go live and work and serve that village for the remaining 2 years. So it's a full experience. This isn't just a 2 week, 3 week mission trip, right? This is you're living there, you're immersed in it.
And so at any point in time where you're like, what did I just get myself into? What
Oh
am I
yeah.
doing here? And
Hmm.
and, and so like, okay, with that, you're obviously working through that, but what were some of the things that the Peace Corps does for this community, for this village? Like, what were some of you and your cohorts, what were you guys doing for this community, for the Peace Corps?
So for that specific community, we weren't doing anything. We were just there learning. They were hosting us there, as a staging ground for what was to come. And so what was to come was, after you go through your training, you're selected. There's different villages around the entire country that votes to have a Peace Corps volunteer, and they have to have certain living conditions prepared ahead of time and all of that to qualify. And so you get chosen your village, and then you go and visit that village for a week, meet with other the Peace Corps volunteers that are around that area, and then you come back to training. And then, of course, after that, you're sent off for good. So fast forward, I get sent off for good to my village. The closest Peace Corps volunteer to me at that point then was about an hour and a half. So I'm isolated. I'm in the village. Nobody speaks English. I am the only person living there, just 2, 3 months off of training. And now I have to really adapt, right? I'm cooking over a fire. There's no electricity. There's no modern amenities, bucket bathing, all the whole deal. So now you're by yourself. You don't have anybody to rely on but yourself. And that's where you get tested, right? There's just so many challenges that come up through that experience.
So is there a point in time where you went through your training, you get shipped off to this village, and I'll be the first one to admit I have no experience over in the continent of Africa. Um, I know probably little to nothing in terms of what really happens. Obviously, depictions from the media, depictions from movies, um, but obviously parts of Africa are not very safe. Um, is there anything that happened to you over there that you really were, super uncomfortable with in terms of you were, I guess, frightened for your well-being? Or, were you like, being a part of the Peace Corps, does that get you some safety, protocols, or are you protected in any ways? Or even on the other side, were you ever at threat because of the fact you were a part of Peace Corps?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me personally, I never felt unsafe. I didn't have any really any concern for my life at all. Like there's a lot of due diligence that goes into place before they place Peace Corps volunteers. That does not mean things don't happen. I know Peace Corps volunteers that have had very intense experiences and incidences where things have happened. Fortunately for me, I was safe and I never felt threatened at all. In fact, in my village, I was really treated like royalty in a way, to a point of almost uncomfortability,
Mm.
where they really regarded me, and who I was as this sort of high value person, which was very interesting for me because, just being a regular old person in the world, like I didn't really, it was a very interesting feeling. But nonetheless, like my community overall, like the people that I had there, especially I met somebody who ended up becoming my best friend. His name was Peter. Him and I, spent most days together. He was the one that really showed me around and took care of me. And, that in itself, feeling like a part of a community was something I never felt before because, in America, we live in this sort of like individuated type situations where we don't have solid community. These people thrive on community because if they don't
Mm.
have it, they're going to die.
Yeah, I mean, that's we could probably talk about that all day long in terms of community and as human beings, how we were designed, and that's thousands of years ago. That's like you said, that was their survival. That's how we were designed as human beings. Um, but you spent, what was it, 2 years over there?
Yeah, so spent 2 years over there, and yeah, I mean, there's so much I could say about the situation. All in all, it was a breeding ground for my spiritual and personal development. It was a way for me to not only give back and serve, which was beautiful, but I also received so much in return. Day by day I did my work, but also, read a lot, wrote a lot, practiced a lot, meditation, yoga, breath work, and really just honed in on my inner world to excavate where I was living out of alignment, where I was living out of integrity with my soul. And it was really just a way of deep, deep and profound soul searching. And that experience in itself was worth every minute of it. And I definitely don't regret any of it.
So there it is. That's where I wanted to kind of get us to,
Yep.
because that says a lot about that decision, right? That is why you listen to that calling. That was the purpose of you being there outside, helping people, being of service, that that was that listening to your intuition, following that intuitive nature of yourself led you to that so you could get to here where you are today. Um, but so the 2 years in Africa with the Peace Corps, um, there was an experience that you had, a near death experience that was, a very pivotal moment. I'd imagine as you sit here with us today, opposed to, the obvious alternative. Why don't you talk about that experience a little bit? I've heard it a couple times, just from you sharing it, but for our audience, I think that's a pretty poignant moment of how you got to where you are in terms of beats and breath, in terms of what you do in terms of helping others and the way you help others. Um, and I'd like to have you share that, and then also kind of talk about maybe that leads you into your experience and the value that you put into breath work.
Mm. Yeah, so during that time in Africa, I had taken a trip to Zambia and Zimbabwe. It was over New Year's Eve. This is 2014 going into 2015. And there was a music festival that I really wanted to go to. But while I was there, I felt this like just thrill seeking side of me really wanting to come out, this adrenaline rush. And I saw they had two experiences. One was a bungee jump, right? So it's not like a typical bungee jump where you're tied at your feet. You're actually strapped around your whole body and you jump off this cliff and it plummets you like 400 feet down where the Zambezi River is and you fly across the river. It was the craziest thing I've ever done in my life. And that day I did that. And then the next day I go and I sign up for whitewater rafting, which I had done before a couple times in the States. But I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And so they strap us in and we're going down the different rapids. We're about 10, 12 rapids in and things are getting really intense. Like, people are kind of falling out, losing their grip, their handle. The boat's tipped a couple times by now. And then we approach this rapid. And I saw up ahead, I looked at it and I was like, holy shit, like this is the craziest rapid I think I've ever seen in my life. Like, I don't know if this is even legal. How am I supposed to be doing this where I'm not an experienced whitewater rafter? And so we approached the rapid. Just as we entered it, the boat hit a rock and it popped up my side of the boat. I was in the front left as a paddler, popped me out, and I got ejected into the water. And the boat just started to go down the rapid, right? So I'm having to ride a class 5 rapid, which I found out later what it was, a class 5 rapid basically the whole way down,
It's like
which
professional level, by the way, classified rapid.
yes,
Like, that's
yes,
professional level. Like, you need helmets and you need to be trained.
yes. This is in child's play, right? This isn't the class one, two, threes that
Right.
I've done in the past. So I'm now in the middle of this chaos. The rapids are all around me. I am underneath the water, above the water, underneath the water, above the water. I can't catch a breath. I'm swallowing loads and loads of water. And they tell you in these situations, don't panic, but your survival
Right.
mechanism kicks in, your nervous system's in fight or flight, and you just don't have a choice. And so I'm trying to do whatever I can to swim for help and try to, but the rapid just keeps sucking me under. And this just goes on and on and on and on. And finally, I'm just losing strength. I can barely move anymore. I'm just being spun around like a washing machine. And there was a point during that experience where I had just fully surrendered. I let go because I'm like, I can't do anything anymore. I'm at the mercy of this wild water that I'm in. And so I look up and I remember, and I've explained this many times before on other shows, but I'll share it again, where I saw just this, it was like the sunlight coming down through the water. And I'm just living it right now every time I tell the story. And I was being called and drawn towards this light. And if you've read any near death experience books, people talk about this tunnel of light that appears. And at this point, I'm fully basically drowned. I have no more air. I've swallowed all this water. I'm just at the mercy here. And so finally, this light just gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And it's like I'm being pulled towards it. It's like I'm leaving my body. Like every second, a part of me is leaving my body and I'm being drawn towards it. And then at the last moment, as I'm about to like be engulfed by this light, I get pulled out of the water and yanked out by this kayaker who saw my body. And I had washed up against this big rock and he grabbed me and put me in his kayak. And I was not fully back in my body, but all I remember was him just like pumping on my chest and I'm just like coughing out all of this water. And from that moment on, like from that very moment on, that was a massive wake up call for me. And it taught me so many things. And one of the things that I took away from that experience is I will never, ever again take for granted my breath. because your breath is the connection to this world. It is what keeps you alive. And it is way more than that, which we'll talk about later. But it is that direct connection to being alive and what a gift it is to breathe and to be here. And so that was a profound moment of realization. And from that, I've carried that forth with me.
Yeah, that's I mean, what an amazing story, and, talking about near-death experience, there's a book called Embraced by the Light by Betty Eadie. It's great book, and then I've also heard you mention, Many Lives, Many Masters by Dr. Brian L. Weiss.
Mhm.
That book, amazing, for me, that it was an expansion of understanding, one person's experience with the scientific mind and being, a guy who was the head of psychology at the University of Miami, being, not spiritual at all, by the book, psychology, and his experience. Highly recommend it if you've never read it before. It's homework for the Just Jake listeners. Um, it's just a fascinating book by a man named Dr. Brian L. Weiss. The book is Many Lives, Many Masters. Um, and maybe just take a second to talk about that. I know that was a pivotal read for you in your life. And, for me, absolutely, it was an eye opener. Um, why don't you talk about what that book means to you?
Yeah, so that was a book that really was a catalyst. Just as I was speaking to the Peace Corps, to this near death experience, that book in 2008, pre Peace Corps, was a catalyst for me. It was given to me, and that was really answering a lot of the questions I had around, past lives, about reincarnation, about all of the things that I felt very curious about. And there was this deep inquiry about. I was reading all of these texts, and I really wanted to know because intuitively I felt that, we had these different lives, and I feel that we've gone through these different experiences, and we're carrying through this karma into these lives. And so that book was a foundational read for me because it really anchored in the sense of safety and trust, knowing that I'm an infinite being that has incarnated perhaps multiple hundreds of times on this planet and other planets, and that nothing can really hurt me. And so, then several years later, going through that near death experience, there was so much that I tied in, the crossover between reading those books, reading that book, and then having that experience myself and touching that light that calls you. And of course, I haven't fully visited the other side. I know there's many accounts that have, that can share many different stories, but
Mhm.
nonetheless, it just instilled my faith in that there's a greater plan at play here, and that there's nothing to be scared of around death either.
Right, one of my favorite sayings in the world by Pierre Tilliard Desjardins, "I'm not a human being having a spiritual experience. I'm a spiritual being having a human experience." And, some of those things that, because I grew up, and I have a profounder respect for the Catholic faith. I still go to a Catholic church on occasion. I don't have anything ill to say about Catholicism. It's the basis of what I believe in today, but it's certainly, the God I grew up with is certainly not the God that I walk with today. And when I say the word God, it's just because I haven't found a shorter word, and it's a God individual to me. Um, but You Own the Power. It's a book by Rosemary Alty. And I'll put all these in the show notes. And then another book called The Journey of Self-Discovery by Swami Prabhupada. Two books that were like that for me, that I grew up thinking, okay, there's a big guy in the sky with a big beard, and that's where I'm going to go if I'm good. And if I don't, then, eternal damnation, and look, if anybody tells you they know exactly what happens after you die, they're lying to you. If anybody tells you that they knew what they were doing before they got here, they're lying to you. Um, you know, uh, because look, it's a belief, and and we try to have this understanding. But the reality is that for me, this is just for me. I was somewhere before I got here, and I'm going to go somewhere after I leave here, this body, I mean, the spirit that we are talking about. And where that was, I have no idea. And where that's going to be, I have no idea. But all I have right now is this present moment in this body. I'm so blessed to have this experience. And so, I don't take it for granted. And that let's go back into that, the breath that you're talking about, how much you value it after having that experience. And once something's taken away from you, as valuable, the most valuable thing that any of us have, we take like 20,000 breaths a day, you know, that's on average human being. It's like, if you're like most people, are you being conscious of that breath? No, probably not. And it's like, if we just, pause and take a chance to be present in the moment, that's 20,000 opportunities to be appreciative. What a gift that is. So how'd you get into breath work? Why did it become such an important thing to you? Was it, were you doing breath work before you had that experience in the rapids, or is it something that you were tapping into prior and then that experience just kind of catapulted you into that work?
Yeah, so I was just starting to get into, yoga, meditation, specifically Kundalini yoga. And then, after that experience was when I really began to consciously and intentionally work with my breath and finding out that it was this mechanism, this tool, this technology that wasn't only to ground us here in this human experience, but it was a way to connect with the higher aspects of yourself and to connect with something greater, to connect with your own inner freedom and liberation, a way for you to transcend the mind and move into higher states and dimensions of consciousness, a way for you to heal and transform yourself. So, the multi-dimensional manner of breath and what breath actually means, which we can break down the and go down into the roots of the word, right? Which means to inspire, and it's connected with spirit. It's the Holy Spirit, and there's so much, power behind our breath. Yet again, most of us don't pay attention to it. So after this experience, I started to dive deep into researching, practicing, studying breath work, and I knew that this experience I had was a catalyst for me to help me remember the gifts that I've carried through from lifetime to lifetime, and this being one of the more transformative gifts that I hold, to be a facilitator and a guide of breath. And I had an experience several years later, 3 or 4 years later, where I was speaking at a wellness festival, and the yoga teacher had canceled. And the woman running the festival said, "Hey, can any of you speakers, can you facilitate anything, yoga or whatever?" And because she canceled and we need somebody to fill this slot. And I'm like, I can teach people how to breathe. She's like, "Okay, let's do it." So I'm like 150 people. It's my first time,
Wow.
facilitating. And I'm just like, okay, facilitate whatever comes to you. Just tune into your intuition, go into a meditation and facilitate this. Long story short, 20, 30 minutes go by. I finished doing my thing, and people are coming up to me like, "Wow, like that was profound. How long have you been doing this for?" And I'm like, "This is my first time. I've never done this before." But I knew in that moment there was something that was really wanting to be expressed through that. And for me, like, guiding the breath is guiding life and guiding people through that experience of transformation, is something that is such a gift for me, and something I deeply cherish.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanna dive into it, it's like, I had to take Latin in high school because I went to a Catholic high school, and it's like spiritus is the
Mhm.
word for breath, the verb is inspire, so that you just think about the word in Latin, which is, the root of most all romantic languages in the common world, inspire and spirit, and we say breath, but that's what we're talking about. And let's dive into a little bit about the breath, and the benefits that you find in what you see around you when you lead these breath works. And maybe if you could share, I don't know, I've had some pretty powerful experiences doing breath work. I've done it on my own. I've done it individual classes, and it's like it's crazy because there's so many different ways to do breath work. And it's like it's becoming a very popular thing. But if you think about it, right, stress, the definition of stress, right, it's an autonomic, disruption, basically, a dysregulation in your autonomic system. That's what stress is. And what for me, what breath does is it regulates my autonomic nervous system. I'd mentioned to you prior to coming on here, my introduction to breath work was through Wim Hof,
Mhm.
and a man who is been studied to the point where, we call it autonomic nervous system, but that's not true. It's not automatic, right? We can actually control our heartbeat. We can these things that before long ago, like yogis in the mountains of India were doing these things, but in the Western world, we just thought we had this system. We don't know how to regulate it. It's just automatic. Our breathing's just automatic. Our heart rates. Obviously, when things external happen to us, it lowers and raises. But now we know that autonomic nervous system, we can actually control it, right? So what's that mean is that when there's a dysregulation in my autonomic nervous system, the stress that it's creating, the cortisol levels that my body creates, right, I can actually control that, right? And so for me, that's where I find benefit. Like, maybe share some of the experiences that you've seen or even you've had yourself, and the benefits that you obviously something that you feel so passionately about to create an app that's an awesome app that for me I've found immense benefit just in the 2 weeks that I've been able to utilize it. So maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so we'll just break it down on a basic level, a one-on-one level, because I think that's important. So you
Sure.
just described a little bit. So there's really two types of breathing, right? And that can be done, in terms of the category of breath work, right? There's sympathetic breathing, there's parasympathetic breathing, right? Your holotropic breath work, your transformational breath work, your shamanic breath work would fall into the sympathetic category. It's deep, fast, profound mouth breathing in and out, and really engaging the sympathetic state to really activate all of those hormones within, right? Which can catapult you to very heightened states of consciousness. I mean, you can have DMT type of experiences with that type of breath work. It also is a way to excavate deep seated levels of trauma that have been stored within us, because all trauma is, and if we break it down fully, which is actually a really important point to understand, is when we have a traumatic situation, when there's a wound that happens, we go into fight or flight. Our nervous system gets activated. We go into survival mode. And in that mode, we can't process emotions. And so those emotions that are associated with that wound or that trauma get stored into the body, right? And different aspects of ourself are fragmented as well. And so with breath work, and specifically like that breath work, you can really drum up a lot of energy that's been stored and release it, right? So that's one aspect. The other aspect is parasympathetic breathing. That's more slower paced breathing. That's breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth in a rhythmic way. And that type of breathing can absolutely help you release stored energy and trauma. But at the same time, it's dropping you into a more balanced, harmonized, and coherent state. And it's from that coherent state, that point of relaxation, where you connect to a deeper level of presence. And when you connect to that deeper level of presence, you're connecting with the all that is. You're connecting with your intuition. You're connecting with your soul. And so the breath work that I facilitate, that I like to facilitate, falls more in the parasympathetic category. We do have more activating experiences, whether that's musically or whether that's through the breath. And we do have some mouth breathing and some faster 1-1-2-2 rhythms. But for the most part, my core intention with breath work is getting people into a more parasympathetic state, because we live in a culture that is extremely busy and chaotic and lives from the mind. And that has created dis-ease and illness on this planet. And so for me, relaxation and serenity and peace is the gateway to your power. It is the gateway to connect you to a deeper level of freedom, to remove the prisons that you've been living in within yourself. And we can do that each day as a practice by getting into a parasympathetic state. And over time, that has a ripple effect on our entire nervous system and the way we live life in a more slow, focused, present way. And that is also speaking to the feminine, which we've oppressed within ourselves because we live in a hyper masculine state all the time. The masculine's amazing, the feminine's amazing. I'm not speaking about genders, I'm speaking about energies. But when they're balanced together, you create a coherent individual. And the first place to do that starts with the parasympathetic nervous system. I can keep going, but that'll stop there.
No, it's great. I love it. It's you getting into just the chemistry side of it, right? It's we get in that fight or flight or freeze mode that you're talking about, and we get used to that as our baseline, and we live in that, and we don't breathe normally. We don't breathe like we were designed to breathe. And that's where the disease that you're coming, dis-ease is disease, right? We and I don't want to get too far out, but you look at it doesn't matter what it is. They did all these studies on all these different chronic diseases, whether it be cancer, heart disease, diabetes, all, and they were looking for a common thread. What's the common thread in all these diseases? And the common thread is one thing, and it's inflammation, right? We live in an inflamed state, right? And that goes for the amount of cortisol that our body pumps, and it goes back to that traumatic experiences that we relive, and then we live in a state of stress. And what breath work for me has helped is when you get into that, you can change who you are physically. You can change the chemistry of your body because you're oxygenating yourself.
Yep.
What's the one thing that all your cells and every cell in your body needs is oxygen, right? So when we raise our levels of O2 in our body, right, we get rid of the carbon dioxide, right? We breathe that out, but most of the time we're not breathing it in and out fully. So we're not taking in the oxygen that our body needs. We're not getting rid of the carbon dioxide that our body needs to express, right? And we're not, that stress, it all, it, the balance. I love what you said. That's what this creates. It creates a balance, and we can change who we are physically with the chemistry of our body. And so with that said, let's dive into beats and breath a little bit, right? And you can find it on the Apple store. It's where I got it. You can go to the Android store, Google whatever wherever you get your apps at, go there. It's Beats and Breath. It's a great app. I think you have like a 7-day free trial, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if you have never done breath work ever in your life, go download this. They have a great 7-day program. Try it out. If you're experienced with breath work, go do this, because I've sat in breathing circles many a times, and I it's a great way to start your day. It's part of my morning practices that I do, part of my non-negotiables. How did you come up with Beats and Breath? You're a co-founder, so obviously it means somebody else is doing this with you. Talk about how you guys came up with Beats and Breath, and who your partner is in all this work, because it's awesome how you tie. I know that you are one of the voices on it, I believe, and then you have
A female.
female voice as well. And then the music that goes along with it. I mean, it's fantastic in terms of, it's not someone who's constantly talking, because you have a simulated sound that goes with it. And it's just awesome. How do you say it?
Binaural beats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an easy one for me.
Yeah. All good.
dive into that a little bit. How'd you come up with this app?
Yeah. So, back in 2017, 2018, I was going through a bunch of trainings, breathwork trainings, different certifications. And, one of the things that I noticed through all of them, I took different pieces from each of them, and all of them had a profound effect on me. And kind of what I was talking about before of like the style in which I wanted to facilitate and guide. And just to kind of take one last piece from our previous conversation, what we were just talking about with the trauma response, is that most people, like I said, are stuck in a sympathetic state, in a fight or flight state. And so what does that do? Right. So that's an imprint that happens within the nervous system. And that directly impacts your breathing, which oftentimes is very shallow. And even I would invite people who are listening to this just to pay attention to your breathing for a moment. Is it shallow? Are you breathing from your chest? Are you breathing fast? Are you holding your breath and not breathing? These are all symptoms of a stressed, anxious, overwhelmed nervous system, which then can be traced back to perhaps different set of wounding patterns that you've gone through or traumatic experiences. And so we can unwind everything through the breath. How we're designed to breathe, if we look at a baby or a young child, they're breathing from the belly, they're breathing from the diaphragm. When we breathe from the diaphragm, that's where we extract our power, because our power center is actually in our navel. And our navel is where we store prana, chi, life force energy. It's our dantian. That's where we have all of this stored energy. And so practice, even just for a few moments, taking a breath into the belly. It might take you a few times because you're not used to it. But I would invite you to do that as you listen to the rest of this conversation. And so, fast forward after going through these trainings, I really wanted to create a musical element to it, because the music, breath, and sound are the primordial forces of life, right? These are ancient forces that have really been instrumental in creation, right? In all of creation. And so how do we pair these two elements together in a profound way? So I came up with this sort of modality, this term called sonic breath work. And that's what we call Beats and Breath. All of our creations is constructed through the lens of sonic breath work, which combines rhythmic parasympathetic breathing, ancient breathing techniques, with modern cutting edge musical compositions that have a beat to it, that hit you, right? That wake up your primordial power within you. And yeah, we have some more up tempo activating music, which I love to get down to. And then we have down tempo stuff as well. But my co-partner, Johnny Buffalo, and I met Johnny in 2020. I was facilitating at a men's circle in Buffalo, and he had happened to drop in. He just got back from New York City, spending the past 8 years, working as a professional beatboxer in bands. He's a classically trained guitarist. He's essentially a musical savant. And he came to me after that breathwork journey, had a very profound experience just a couple days before, an awakening experience. Came to me after and was like, wow, I had like similar experience. What is that? He's like, who makes your music? And I said, nobody yet. I'm just using music I got from my training. He goes, well, I want to create with you. And just 3-4 months before that, I'm like, I need a musician to create with me. So we started creating right off the bat. We created a concept album called Soul Rise, which was 5 33-minute breathwork journeys through the elements. You can find that on the app. That was our first project before the name Beats and Breath ever came through. And then in February of that following year, in 2021, we went into a mushroom journey together, psilocybin mushroom journey, with a group of people. And this is a funny story. I've only told this a couple times, but in that journey, everybody was like, we were playing music in silence for a while, and then we came back into conversation. And my friend Mike's like, if you were a Care Bear, what Care Bear would you be? And I'm like, I'd be Breath Bear. And Johnny would be like, I'm Beats Bear. And then right in that situation, we looked at each other like, Beats and Breath. And so that's how Beats and Breath actually came to fruition.
That's fantastic. Oh man. Um, let's let's stick there for a little bit. So in creating this, like what was your background before? Did you have someone design it for you? Were you familiar with how apps are created? How'd you I mean, I hear people talk about building apps all the time. I don't have very much experience with it, but I can't imagine it's something that's really easy to do. But the interface for it's fantastic. It's easy to find, easy to move through, find what you need to do, whether because you do have meditations on there as well. So it's
Mhm.
breath work and meditations. So what was that like designing this app?
Yeah, so that was always a dream to have a piece of technology that can make this accessible. So for me, my mission from the beginning, wherever this decided to go, because and I were creating, 3 years prior to when the app actually came out. And so the idea was to get this medicine,
Mm,
into the hands of as many people as possible because of the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual benefits of breathing. And so what can do that in this day and age? An app, and an app is something that, is definitely not easy to come by, especially because it costs a lot of money. And, the stars were aligned and we found an investor found us, loved what we did, decided to invest in us. And we ended up building the app with a team, a design team, and that took several months and then launched it at the end of last year. And so, now really the intention is to get this into many hands as possible, to really teach people how to breathe again. Because once people find out the power behind their breath, they'll never go back to a place of not breathing, or breathing the way that they were because of the profound and powerful transformative incredible benefits that are a result of breathing deep and intentionally.
so yeah, hopefully this will help carry that mission on. Beats and Breath, highly recommended by Jay Goody here, and go find it on wherever you download your app stores. And there's a free trial. Give it a whirl. I like you said, it's once you it's medicine. Once you look in this life, for me, feeling good is paramount. And
Mm,
I used to my definition of what felt good has changed, because the reality is that, you know, I believe in truth is constantly changing. Truth is not static, right? The facts are static, but the truth changes. Um, and once you add something into your life that makes you feel good, right? It's like I want more of that. And when it's good for you, that's where you're becoming aligned with who God has created you to be. And so moving into some other things that you do, I'm curious, like, what are your regular practices? Like, I mean, obviously you train people, and you work in breath, you work in meditation, you guide, I shouldn't say train, you guide people in these practices. What's like a regular day look like you for I call them my non-negotiables, right? I have
mm,
these things in my life that, for the longest time, like I have a policy. There's no negotiating with terrorists, right? And my brain, when I wake up, it's a terrorist mind. It wants to, it wants to go do, some of the things I don't drink anymore. I don't really, I don't use really coffee is the last drug that I put into my body. And so I have a terrorist mind that I wake up that I have to quiet and I don't negotiate with it. And, I have these non-negotiables, it's move my body physically. First thing in the morning I do is I have what I call my morning practices. It involves a silent meditation. It involves breath work. It involves a set of daily prayers that I have. It's 30 to 45 minutes before I do anything. I have a place in my house. I go sit at that same place every day in front of my puja table, and that's how I start my day. That's not negotiable. Like I'll go to work late if I don't. This my day doesn't start till I do this, and that's what my non-negotiables. I move my body every day. That's not negotiable. Whether it's a run, a walk, lifting some weights, like that's not negotiable, right? Doing at least one thing nice for somebody in my day, that is non-negotiable. I have to, whether it's at a gas station, seeing somebody walking out of their car I'll stand there and wait and just open a door up for somebody. That's just one thing. I just have to do one. It's not that hard. One thing nice for somebody today. I got to do it.
Mm.
Non-negotiables. So for you, where you're at, what are your regular practices? What's a day in the life of Christopher August look like?
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, and yeah, it's so important to really keep you in the rhythm of life. And I mean, without mentioning, of course, breathing and having some level of practice every day of intentional and conscious breathing is paramount. Because I'm of the belief that if you're going to guide, if you're going to facilitate, if you're going to teach, then you need to walk the talk and embody that. And so that is non-negotiable for me. Movement is another one. I'm big on movement. Generally, I live in the mountains here in Mexico, so I have this beautiful terrace view that looks over the entire mountains and the lake and all of that. And so I just sit every morning in silence and just allow myself to soak in the day, and from there get into some primal movement, get into some shaking, just loosening the body. I really generally my breathing practices will take one of two forms: while moving in the form of qigong, or in a seated practice, or a mix of both. And that's kind of, yeah, just the way I like to spend the first hour of my day. Sometimes I'll write a little bit, but for me, it's just like really important to get grounded, because I serve so many people, whether it's in my group programs or online, whatever it is. I'm serving a lot of people, and I'm facilitating a lot. So it's really important for me to take care of myself in this way, because there's no way I could do what I do if I didn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, we hear a lot of people these days talk about imposter syndrome, right? And
Mhm.
I have a hard time with it, because I believe if you have that feeling, then there is some truth in that feeling, and it goes to what you're saying. How can I possibly be guiding people at doing this if I'm not doing it myself? And I think that's where when people get the imposter syndrome, it's because you should be doing something that you're not doing on some level, and so that's like that's a real big catchword nowadays. Like, oh, if you have imposter syndrome, it's really just a false belief, and it's like, yeah, there's something in you telling you that you're not doing something. So I love that, that belief. Hey, I'm going to be exposed, right? That's the reality. If you're not practicing what you're trying to be about, like you're going to be exposed. And not to get off on a tangent, but I love that. And maybe this is diving into a little bit like some of your influences. Like, who are some of your teachers on this journey? You mentioned that book by Dr. Brian L. Weiss. Um, maybe somebody or a couple of people that you really they're teaching. I always want to be teachable. That's what I live my life on. A couple things is that I wake up every day and I tell myself, I really don't know anything, and that's the truth. And what I don't know is way more important than what I do know. And
Mm.
and in those ways, I stay teachable, because look, I want to help people help themselves. That's what this podcast is about. That's what my daily purpose. I've said it on this podcast before. I wake up and I say, God, open up my heart, open up my mind, reach in and touch this soul, so I can be of maximum service to you, God, and to the men, women, and children I go about today. I say that out loud every day. It's part of my morning practices, and so like some of the influences to get you to where you are today, because obviously, without you having to say, I mean, you have stated that you wanted to get this medicine out. Like you clearly, your time in the Peace Corps and being of service, that is, I can tell, and just knowing you the little that I do on this conversation that we've had, and paying attention to what you do in the digital world. You are a man who wants to be of service. Um, where are some of those influences come from?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I love what you say in the beginning of the day. Is very similar to what I also share out loud, and part of my invocation for the day. But there's been many influences. I've had many beautiful teachers come across my path, and many of whom have taught me so much. And again, we're all students. We're all humble students. I hope so, and we're also teachers. We have a gift to share, right? We have a gift to express. And so I look at myself as a student and a teacher, and I can't teach anything without being first a student, being grounded in my own inner work. And so, to name a few, I mean, the book sitting next to me, which it always is, Gene Keys, Richard Rudd. This man has, over the past 7 years, had a profound influence in my life, and I've dedicated a lot of myself to these teachings, to this system, which is an incredible system for personal transformation and self-discovery, and really holds the codes to the unlocking and the awakening of humanity. And so Richard's definitely been there. A couple books on my bookshelf back here. I got Lars Muehl, who's a mystic and a teacher, incredible man, and somebody that I've derived a lot of beautiful wisdom from.
The law of
Um,
light.
the Law of Light, man. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the Gate of Light.
Yeah.
I have all of his books. They're really good. But yeah, I mean, dude, I mean, the list goes on. There's I wouldn't say there's so many, because it is very hard, what I've found, to find very grounded, anchored, embodied, in integrity teachers in these days. There's a lot of bullshit out there, and
False light.
false light type of leaders that,
Sure.
yeah, I mean, that's a whole conversation in itself. So there's a decent amount, but there's still very few. But yeah, there's a couple right there off the top
Well,
of my head.
yeah, I mean, that leads us perfect segue, because the last thing really, as we head towards wrapping this up, the last thing I had on my list is, because I am very novice. I have a very, very basic understanding of the gene keys.
Hmm.
Something I definitely, would love to add to my repertoire. You do, one-on-one gene key readings, and maybe like as you mentioned, that being a very pivotal last 7 years, something that you have benefited greatly from. Why don't you maybe just a explanation for beginners? What are gene keys? What's the explanation for somebody who maybe has never even heard of what gene keys are?
Yep. Yeah. So most people have heard of astrology, or they've heard of human design, right? Human design is a little bit older of a system. Both are both gene keys and human design are founded on the same premise: your personal astrological makeup met with the 64 archetypes of the Chinese I Ching, which is an ancient text that is full of beautiful wisdom teachings. And so, combined together, you have this output, this blueprint, this map of your soul, which is your gene keys profile. And the gene keys is sort of this code book for consciousness expansion. It's a system for personal transformation. And the idea around each of the 64 archetypes of the 64 gene keys is that encoded within each of those keys are these three frequency bands: a shadow, a gift, and a siddhi, SIDDHI, which is a Sanskrit term for like the highest expression or highest potential. So the premise of this is that within your very DNA are these codes that are embedded within you, based on these archetypes and based on your birth information. And the output of this is this profile. And within these codes, you have the ability to transform your own suffering, your own shadows, your own pain, your own darkness into the light, into your gifts. And so the structure of the gene keys is beautiful because it gives you a very practical, applicable, grounded way of working with your inner world, knowing that your inner world directly influences how you experience your external reality. And so the idea around the gene keys is, as you move through these different keys, there's not a goal to reach the highest potential. It's just to transform your unconscious fears and places where you're still in victimization into your gifts, because everybody has a specific creative genius, a purpose that
Mm,
you came here to share with the world. So there's three sequences in the gene keys that you go through. It's made up like a journey. There's the activation sequence, which is all about discovering your higher purpose. There's the Venus sequence, which is all about healing your core wounds from 0 to 21 and opening your heart in relationships. And then there's the Pearl sequence at the top, which is all about liberating prosperity, and prosperity being all aspects of your life, financially, creatively, relationally, purposely, everything. And when you combine all these three sequences and go through this journey, you become an integrated and whole human being, and therefore are living the embodiment and expressing your core genius, your gifts in the world in service. And the core question of the gene keys, even if you never go through the system, to ask is, how can I be of the greatest service to the whole? Contemplating that question deeply will yield beautiful answers for you then to be of service and to be living your dharma and your purpose.
yeah, it's great, man. Your personality creates your personal reality,
Mm,
and that's, Dr. Joe Dispenza, his work, he talks a lot about that, and it's like, you can change your personality, you if you wanna grow, your personality has to you have to leave behind who you used to be,
mhm.
and that's kinda, I think from my understanding is that's kinda exploring, the growth in your personality and opening doors to understanding and having the awareness to grow into what you were meant to be. Um, so man, I just wanna be respectful of your time and maybe, um, just as we head out, maybe, just would you mind leading us just in a maybe a minute or 2 or 3,
Sure.
just a little breath work before we bow out and I give you the floor. We'll just do a little breath work for people who have, maybe never done it before, maybe this is their first experience, if you don't mind, if that's not asking too much.
No, not at all, man. I would love to. And, unfortunately, I don't have the music component with me, so it'll be a silent guided experience. But yeah, let's hop in for a few minutes. So, if you're driving, you might not want to be doing this while you're driving. You want to stop your car or pull over or find a comfortable place. And if you are in a comfortable place, just feel yourself seated, your sit bones grounded to the surface beneath you, your feet planted onto the earth, onto the ground, feeling your spine erect, and just closing down your eyes, closing down, moving within your own inner world for just a few moments. And together, we'll just exhale out all of the air, and we'll take a deep, steady breath in through our nose. Hold at the top, and we'll exhale all the way out to the bottom. To do that a few more times. We're going to breathe all the way in. Hold the breath at the top. And slow, steady exhale to the bottom. And again, breathing in, really engaging your belly, expanding it out as you breathe. Holding, carrying the energy up. And release, exhale to the bottom. And just for this next few moments, I just want you to anchor into your natural breathing, seeing if you can deepen just a little bit more into your belly, feeling the inflow and the outflow of your breath, and allowing that to create an environment, an internal space of calm, of relaxation, of peace. And if you happen to notice any tension, if you happen to notice any tightness or resistance, just breathe into that area in your body, sending a healing breath in and out and release. And in a few moments, we're going to breathe together for just a couple minutes. We're going to breathe to a 4/4 rhythm in this continuous, connected manner. And we're going to begin in 3, 2, 1, following my breath, breathing in and out. In and out. In, out. Staying with that rhythm. Just keep it going. Three more. And breathe all the way in. Hold your breath. Constrict the energy, carrying the breath all the way up from the navel to the heart, all the way up to the top of your head. Just feel the rush of energy and slow, steady exhale. Emptying all the way out. Holding your breath at this still point. And just simply noticing. Feeling into what's present, into what's alive. And we'll take a deep breath back in. And release. And just returning back to your normal inhale and exhale. Just notice how you feel. Notice the difference in your body, in your mind, in your spirit. And just opening your eyes when you're ready. And taking a look around.
My man, Christopher August. Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome, man.
ChristopherAugust.co. You can be found on Instagram, Christopher_August, YouTube, Christopher August 888. Am I missing anything?
Beatsandbreath.com, Beats and Breath app. That's cool. Other than that, you covered it, my man. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for doing what you're doing. It's really positive to really just see more people like yourself to be putting out these messages, and I can feel your service and your love. So thank you, man.
Brother, I appreciate the connection. I look forward to a friendship and meeting you in the flesh and the person, and hopefully you can make that happen sooner than later. So thank you so much for your time. I like to close out my show saying, when you change your thinking, you change your life. Namaste. Good night now.